Berlin, 1956. A man in a civilian suit drives alone through a checkpoint into Soviet-controlled East Germany. No uniform, no weapon, no backup. His orders were simple. If anything goes wrong, the United States government will deny you ever existed. He was not a spy. He was an American soldier, and he was one of dozens sent on a mission so classified that it remained buried for nearly 30 years, hidden from Congress, hidden from the American public, and hidden from the very soldiers' families who never fully understood where their fathers and husbands had gone. This is the story of Detachment A, the secret American unit that was never supposed to exist, and what they were prepared to do if the Cold War turned hot. Before we go any further, if you are someone who believes that the real story of American history deserves to be told in full, without filters and without the parts that powerful institutions prefer to leave out, then this channel was built for you. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Every single week, we go deep into the classified chapters of history that were deliberately kept from the public. The operations, the cover-ups, and the people who carried secrets to their graves. It takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely makes a difference. Now, let us go back to Berlin. To understand what Detachment A was, you first need to understand what Berlin looked like in 1956. The Second World War had ended 11 years earlier, but the peace that followed was not really peace. It was tension. It was suspicion. It was two superpowers standing on opposite sides of a line, each one certain that the other was about to make a move. Germany had been divided into 2 countries, West Germany aligned with NATO and the Democratic West. East Germany fell under Soviet control and became one of the most heavily monitored police states in modern history. And Berlin, a single city sitting deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany, was divided right down the middle. West Berlin was a small island of Western democracy surrounded on all sides by communist territory. The Soviets controlled every road in and every road out. If they decided to close the borders, West Berlin would be completely cut off from the rest of the free world. American military commanders understood what this meant. If the Cold War ever turned into a real war, if Soviet tanks ever rolled across the border, West Berlin would fall within hours, unless someone was already inside, unless there was a unit already in position, already trained, already embedded deep within the city, ready to operate behind enemy lines the moment the first shot was fired. That was the idea behind Detachment A. In 1956, the United States Army quietly selected 6 Special Forces teams from the 10th Special Forces Group based in Bad Tölz, West Germany. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were hand-picked, fluent in German, trained in unconventional warfare, intelligence gathering, sabotage, and survival behind enemy lines. They were chosen specifically because they could pass, in language, in appearance, and in behavior, as civilians in a German city. Because that is exactly what they were required to become. The soldiers of Detachment A did not live on a military base. They did not wear uniforms in public. They did not carry military identification. They lived in civilian apartments scattered across West Berlin, blending into the neighborhoods around them, working cover jobs, building false identities that could withstand Soviet scrutiny. Their first journey into position was itself an operation. Because West Berlin was surrounded by Soviet territory, there was no safe way to fly an entire classified Special Forces unit directly into the city without attracting attention. So the soldiers did something that seems almost impossible in retrospect. They drove, individually, in private civilian cars, through Soviet-controlled East Germany, passing through checkpoints operated by soldiers of the Red Army, presenting false documents, maintaining their civilian cover, and hoping that nothing would go wrong. If anything had gone wrong, if a checkpoint officer had been suspicious, if a document had been questioned too closely, if a single soldier had broken under pressure, the United States government had prepared a very specific response. Deny everything. These men did not exist. This unit did not exist. The United States Army had no special forces operating in Berlin. That was the official position. And every soldier who crossed that border understood it completely before he got in the car. Once in position, Detachment A had a mission unlike anything in conventional military planning. They were not there to fight in the traditional sense. They were there to stay hidden, gather intelligence on Soviet military movements, and wait. Wait for the order that everyone hoped would never come. Because if that order arrived, if the Cold War finally broke into open conflict, Detachment A's real mission would begin. They were trained to operate as a stay-behind force. In the event of a Soviet invasion of West Berlin, they would not evacuate with the civilian population. They would not retreat with conventional American forces. They would stay behind Soviet lines in a city under enemy occupation, operating in complete secrecy, conducting sabotage operations, gathering intelligence, disrupting Soviet supply lines, and maintaining communication with American command, all while living as invisible civilians in an occupied city. It was, by any honest measure, a suicide mission in waiting. The soldiers of Detachment A understood this. Their families living nearby in West Berlin were told only the minimum necessary. Many knew their husbands and fathers were in the military. Very few understood the full reality of what that meant in this context. For nearly 30 years, this continued. Soldiers rotated in and out. New men were trained and inserted. The unit evolved, adapted, and remained completely hidden from public knowledge. Congress did not know the full details. The American public had no idea. And the Soviets, despite their extensive intelligence operations in Berlin, never fully confirmed what was living quietly in the apartments across the line. Declassified documents that emerged decades later revealed the full scope of what Detachment A was prepared to do if activated. Their equipment was extraordinary for a unit that was not supposed to exist. Sniper rifles, rocket launchers, demolition kits capable of destroying critical infrastructure, advanced radio systems for maintaining contact with American command even under enemy jamming, enough supplies to operate independently for extended periods without any outside support. They had identified specific targets throughout Berlin: bridges, communication centers, Soviet military command posts, supply routes that would be hit simultaneously the moment the activation order came. The goal was not to stop a Soviet invasion. That was understood to be impossible with a unit of this size. The goal was to slow it down, to cause enough disruption, enough confusion, and enough damage to Soviet operations that American and NATO forces could respond and mount a credible defense before West Berlin was completely overrun. In other words, the soldiers of Detachment A were, in a very specific and deliberate sense, expendable. They were positioned to buy time with their lives, and they accepted that assignment willingly because they believed, as most of them stated in later interviews, that the alternative was unacceptable. A Soviet-controlled Europe, a Berlin without freedom, a Cold War lost not on a battlefield, but through the absence of anyone willing to stand in the way. What makes the story of detachment a particularly haunting is not what they were prepared to do. It is how completely they were erased from official history while they were doing it. For the entirety of the unit's operational period, nearly 3 decades, their existence was classified at the highest levels of the United States government. Veterans who served in Detachment A returned home to families and communities and could say almost nothing about where they had been or what they had done. Some never spoke about it at all. Others waited for decades until declassification finally allowed them to share fragments of the experience before their children and grandchildren understood what their service had actually involved. The historical record that does exist came largely through Freedom of Information Act requests filed by journalists and historians years after the unit had been disbanded. Even those records are incomplete. There are operational details, mission parameters, and individual accounts that remain classified to this day. Documents that the United States government has not released and has given no timeline for releasing, which raises a question that nobody in an official capacity has fully answered. What exactly happened during those 30 years that still cannot be disclosed? What did these men see, do, or know that continues to be protected decades after the Cold War ended? The soldiers who are still alive have honored their oaths of silence. The government has honored its tradition of selective disclosure. And the full story of Detachment A, the complete truth of what America had living quietly in the apartments of West Berlin for 3 decades, remains officially unfinished. Here is what we know with certainty. For nearly 30 years, a group of American soldiers lived double lives in one of the most dangerous cities on earth. They gave up their identities, their privacy, and in many cases, their ability to share the truth of their service with the people they loved most. They were never celebrated publicly. They were never awarded medals in ceremonies that the press could photograph. They were never the subject of Hollywood films or best-selling books, at least not while it mattered. They were simply there, invisible, prepared, ready to give everything if the moment came. The moment never came. The Cold War ended without Detachment A ever receiving the activation order they had trained for through 3 decades of quiet waiting. In one sense, that is the best possible outcome. In another sense, it means that what these men sacrificed, the years of secrecy, the weight of the mission they carried, the lives they could not fully live, was never witnessed by the country they were protecting. History has a long tradition of remembering the wars that were fought. It is far less reliable at remembering the ones that were prevented. Detachment A prevented something. We will never know exactly how close the moment came, and that perhaps is the most unsettling part of this story.